I'm starting.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar for Central Command. We're just going to give everyone one more second to get into the meeting, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay. So today's topic is spring cleaning. I know many of us are in places that are probably very wintry temperatures right now, but we're going to be looking forward to where it gets warmer. The thought about cleaning out not only our houses, but also our databases and the environments that we have for Central Command. So today's topic is going to be about doing just that from more of a technical side. We're going to be doing the presentation like we normally do with our two presenters here today, and then we'll have a time of Q&A. Before we get into that, just a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. Everyone that is here and is registered is going to receive a copy of that once the meeting wraps up and the recording processes. During the meeting, all attendees can be rest assured they will not be seen or heard. So you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. But please consider using the Q&A tab or the chat to put any questions that you have. I think there's even an ability for you to ask them anonymously if you're just a little shyer. And we're going to be getting to those at the end of the presentation. So we'll make sure to be tracking each of those as you ask and as they come to mind. Please be doing that. So for upcoming webinars, we're going to stick with the same time, Thursdays, 11:30 Eastern. And March's topic to look ahead to is going to be online data access or how to report from the web. So again, we're trying to make sure we're nailing all of your burning questions or things that we keep seeing coming up with working with you guys. And so today we're talking about technically how do we improve the performance. And then next month, we're going to be talking more on the functional side again of how to be able to pull those reports from the web, see the data that you're putting into there and make the most of it. We will be announcing our spring webinar topics later this month. So if there's anything that comes to mind that you'd really love to see Michael, Rod, Danny, myself, or someone from the Servita team do a session on, feel free to send me an email. We're always happy to take in feedback from you guys, but look forward to seeing April, May, and June's webinars topics being announced soon at the end of this month before we hit our March webinar. Okay, with that said, today's presenters is going to be Michael Guyette, Director of Product Management here at Servita, and Rod Tomlinson, Director of Operations. And like I mentioned, they're going to be talking about spring cleaning, maintaining a healthy environment. And I'm going to pass it over to Rod to take it away.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen here so we can get ready to roll. Excellent. All right, so for the overview today, what we're going to be talking about is going to be a little bit more technical in nature in some cases, so hopefully we don't put too many people to sleep on this one here today. But we're going to go through our server management for Unit 4. So looking at managing and file retention for our log files and IF files, things like that. I know we do have a lot of questions on that. And I do know that there are some customers that already have some of this in place, but we just want to go through this as well and provide some recommendations. Also with that, we're going to be looking at establishing some hardware and server requirements for the performance as well. And we've had some questions as well on the ODBC driver 17 for SQL. And I know this kind of sounds a little technical, but we do have some recommendations there. And then reviewing configurations and recommendations for the Agresso technical guidelines. So in that technical guidelines, there are some things that sometimes get missed on the setup of the SQL Server environment for Unit 4. Down below here under database management, what we're really looking for here is managing some of the temporary tables that get created, and then looking at handling some automated backup routines with logs and data, and then reviewing configuration recommendations in the Agresso technical guidelines as well. Down below here for the overview for functional tasks, Michael's going to take over here. He's going to look at archiving historical data and indexes, and then setting data retention rules within Unit 4 and configuration of Agresso Management Console. So moving forward here, for our server management file retention here, we're talking, S folders, log files, and report files, and those types of things can add up fairly quickly. And sometimes they take a lot of space. And we find that some people are actually running out of space on their drives and would like to have those cleaned up a little bit. So we will also want to help you kind of decide how long you need to keep these files. And really these things are kind of up to yourselves on how long you feel you may need to have these files. 90 days, 180 days, 365 days. They can be manually archived or they can be scripted on a time schedule. Both of those are entirely up to you. We can zip them up. So if you want to archive a certain amount of files, we can zip them up by a date range. This as well, my apologies. There we go. This as well can be done either automatically through some sort of scripting. We do have some capabilities, and we have done for other customers where we create like a PowerShell script that goes through and reviews these files and also zips them up, archives them, puts them in a separate folder. And sorry, my little screen that popped up here earlier was, even though Windows Server does allow for billions of files and it does handle these things. This is from the Microsoft website, by the way. The performance does degrade. So File Explorer can struggle when opening folders with hundreds of thousands of files in it. And we have seen some customers that have that many files in their data structure. And the directory listings and file searches slow down as the number of files increases, of course. And then your indexing, backup, and antivirus scans may become slow because you're scanning through files that are kind of unnecessary. So what we're looking for here is kind of a best practice. And again, on Windows, my apologies, on the Microsoft site here, it says keep folders below 100,000 files for better performance. Even 100,000 files is pretty high, and it does slow things down when you're trying to search through there. I like to keep things around 50,000 or less, and that seems to be a little bit better for us, or even far less than 50,000. But using subfolders to organize and distribute files is a good way to handle that as well. Yeah, I just had a little picture there earlier just showing you the different types of files. But mine here that I have a circle that shows only 3,200 files, that's nothing. But when we put a couple of zeros behind that, that's when things start to slow down. All right, moving through. So our server management requirements, we've had a number of questions with these as well. So people are upgrading right now, and they're looking at upgrading even their operating systems or new servers. And they've had questions on what is a good operating system to go with. Obviously, we have the recommendations from Unit 4 that's on the website as well. In our experience, an operating system for Windows Server of 2019 or newer is great, and a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM, minimum hard drive space, 250 gigs of hard drive space is fantastic. And then I put a little chart on the right-hand side here that shows the end of life potentially for Windows Server. And I just went down as far as 2019. I know we do have some customers that are still on 2012 and are looking to upgrade, but this Windows Server 2019 here, the end of mainstream support shows January of 2024, but the extended support is 2029. So really what that means is that for any new stuff as of January 2024, they're not going to be adding anything new, but they still will be using this extended support for security patches and things like that. Obviously, Windows 2022 is supported, and 2019 is supported for Unit 4 as well. I'm going to zip down to database server now. So this is another question, obviously, when people are upgrading their systems. So having an operating system, as we mentioned up above, for 2019 or newer, and then Microsoft SQL 2019 or newer. 2022 is preferred at this time. And there's so many different potential configurations that people can use for their database server. And it really depends on the size of your site as well, but a minimum of 32 gigs of RAM, I think, is good. If you're a bigger site, then it's likely you'd probably want to go to 64 gigs of RAM, or a little bit higher. And then another thing that people have asked about is how to kind of segregate the servers, the drives on the servers. And I know this gets a little bit into the weeds here and a little bit technical, but if we have a C drive with a minimum of 250 gigs, and then splitting out your data and your log and your temporary folders is really kind of a best practice, again, from a Microsoft website. And all of these sizes here, I got 500 gigs to 2 terabytes or 2,000 gigabytes, is again client specific. Log files is client specific as well, and temporaries are log specific. And the reason why I put this in here is because I've seen some client sites that are putting everything on the C drive, which can be a bit of a challenge sometimes, because if your C drive has your operating system on it, as well as all of your data and your logs and things like that on it, it could get out of hand, and it could actually extend the size of whatever you've allocated on your C drive, thus killing your machine. And you'd have to either restore it or do some sort of trickery in order to get it back up and running. And again, we probably have some people that are more technical than I am on the call here, and you probably have your own methods of doing it. That's fine. I think we're just using this as a bit of a baseline. And on the right-hand side here, I did the same thing with SQL Server, just showing the end of life for these as well here. So if we're on 2016 or lower, looks like it should be getting ready to upgrade to something different. Those that are on 2017, looks like you'd still have some time here as far as security patches and whatnot. Likewise at 2019, but 2022, if you're looking to put something new in, I think that's probably the best one to go with. Okay. I put this in here, this 2017 driver. And again, this sounds really technical, and I kind of apologize for that. But so ODBC driver 17 is a newer driver for connecting your application to the database, and it is it runs a little bit more efficiently, and it runs the query execution with a little bit improved parameter handling, and it allows for non-blocking queries and improving application responsiveness. It also helps us support TLS 1.2, which is a security protocol, and a little bit stronger encryption for secure database connections. So it helps us with that. And there are newer drivers out there, for example, ODBC driver 18 and so on and so forth. However, as far as I know, driver 17 is the highest one supported. Now, I could be incorrect at this point, but as far as I know right now, driver 17 is supported by Unit 4, and that does work well. We have a lot of our demonstration databases and clients that are using driver 17. With that, there's a second thing in this part. Oops, my apologies. It's called the Microsoft Object Linking Embedding for SQL. There's 2 new versions that kind of go along with this. There's 18 and or 19. Both are supported by, I have the Agresso Management Console here, the AMC, and I just put this in here as a new kind of a provider string. And again, I know that's very technical, but I just want to put that out there. When we include ODBC driver 17, there's a few different places that need to be updated. And I've got a couple of screenshots down here from the Agresso Management Console. So the ODBC connection is looking for an update here for SQL 17. So after this is installed, we can update that. Likewise, what we have here is from the main connection. This is where we would add in our developed MSOADB SQL. And again, I know that's very technical, and I hope you're still awake, but I just wanted to point this out. And I think this is a good opportunity as we talk about cleaning, doing some spring cleaning. It's good to kind of get a little bit more updated with your database systems. Moving down to some database management temp tables, 2 types of temporary tables that can be safely removed from the database. So in the older days, if we want to call it that, when we did upgrades, the system would, during the upgrades and the upgrade scripts, it would actually create temp tables from those scripts. And I got a screenshot here of what it would look like. And basically, they're just used, obviously, in a temporary manner for when they're making changes to tables within the database system. So we're going to see that we have like TMP as a prefix to each one of these tables here. There are scripts within the within the structure, the file structure, I guess, of the server itself that can get rid of these. But I have a caution here too. So there are some developers that will use this naming convention like TMP for different types of things that they're working on when they're working with code. And we just want to make sure that we don't just blanket start going deleting these, because that could be a little bit dangerous if people are working on them in, I guess if developers are using them for other purposes. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is if you see that we have some temp tables in here, give us a call if you like, and we can go through them and just say, yep, these ones can be removed, or here's a script that can remove those for you. Second, in the temporary table area is within Unit 4, CentralCommand, if there's an opportunity for you to click on Save Temp Tables. That's a feature when you're running a process or a report. And you need to troubleshoot something for whatever reason, and you click on the Save Temp Tables feature, it will save them in this naming convention over here, as you see on the right. So it's very distinctive in the sense that it shows the process name, and then just the table number, and then the order of that report or process it's running. So these ones are strictly for the purpose of troubleshooting, and it saves them in there. They don't always save these tables in there, and those ones as well could be removed. And the reason why I talk about these two types of things that can be removed is it will save some space on your database. Because if they just continue to keep growing and nobody really looks at them, you could have thousands of these temporary tables in here, especially with the ones on the right if you're doing some troubleshooting, and that can just eat up space that's not necessary. All right, and then let's talk about some automated backups. I know everybody has their own method of backing up your database and doing regularly and doing some sort of disaster recovery plan. But I've also noticed that even though that some people are backing up their environment, they're not necessarily backing up the database separately, or sorry, database logs separately and regular. You could create, and this is just some recommendations, and I know everyone has their own method of doing this, but it would be great to see if people creating a scheduled job within SQL Server and monitoring the success, because it's an easy way to give some peace of mind for your data. And what I'm getting at with that is, so the benefits to it obviously is you can run it unmanned if it's automated, and you can run it during off-peak hours and whatnot. But kind of obviously it ensures up-to-date backups as well, so it streamlines the recovery process if necessary. But I think probably one of the more important things here about this is when you back up a little transaction log, because a transaction log just kind of keeps track of everything that's going through the database. And it just continues to grow and grow and grow until you actually back up your database and then back up your log. And what that'll do is it'll just truncate the log to a point where it'll truncate all the data that's already been into the backup from prior, meaning that we've seen situations where a transaction log has just grown exponentially to the point where it's eating up all your disk drive space. And then next thing you know, the server fails, and then we have to go and do some sort of recovery process. But if we do a regular transaction log, it'll kind of keep that nice and neat and clean, and it won't always excessively grow your files. Obviously, another way to kind of preserve some drive space is if you're doing a backup for your database separately, there is a compression feature that I know some people are missing out on. And that compression feature will obviously squish the size of the file, and it's quite safe to use. It doesn't compromise any of the data integrity at all. Obviously, it's going to prevent server downtime. So if you're doing your backups properly and monitoring for success, it will not only there, not only will you be able to serve drive space efficiently and preventing excessive disk usage, it'll be ready if in the case of disaster. All right, one last piece of technical jargon here. We have some database management recommendations from our Agresso technical guidelines. And I think some of these things may get missed, and this is more for the tech team on the call here. These are items that that need to be already in the system, otherwise the system will be working as it is. However, there are a couple of these properties that I'm going to show you here that may be missed. So specifically, if we look at these grant viewer state, this one here provides insights to the health and performance of your database. And then down here we have granting administrator bulk operations to your main login. What this does here is basically without this permission, a user might be blocked from executing bulk import operations. So if there's any large sort of imports that are happening, we want to make sure that those run as efficiently as possible, and that's what this grant administrator bulk operations is for. And there's a couple other little ones down here that are these properties that I'm showing on the right-hand side. These ones here do help with the performance of how things operate, as well as some people may have seen the data lock issues or deadlock issues. And there are several different reasons why we have deadlock issues. However, these items here and some of them do help prevent that, which is what we're looking for. Over here on the right-hand side, a couple of things to note is obviously we always, for your production environment, you want to have a full recovery method. And the compatibility level is another thing that people miss when they're doing their own upgrades and whatnot. If you started out on SQL version, let's say 2012, even though that you've upgraded your SQL server, the database itself may still be sitting at version 2012. So it's good to note here to update that. And then these are these items here within the properties of SQL Server, which are these guys over on the left-hand side. Just pointing out where they can be updated. Yeah, I know that was a lot of technical jargon there. Oops. And then, sorry, I went a little too far there. I think we're moving on to Mr. Michael.
Yeah. While Michael's kind of getting his screen switched over to his slide and the more functional parts of this, two questions for you, Rod. First of all, is updating the drivers a requirement, and what drives the need to upgrade the SQL environment?
Okay, so is 2017 a requirement? Not necessarily, not a requirement. It still will work with the current SQL driver. However, some of the benefits of upgrading to driver 17, just pop up my quick notes here, is really supporting improved query execution. So it's a newer driver, so things are going to work a little bit better, plus the support for the TLS, which is your secure database connections. I think those are probably the main things for upgrading to driver 17. And I'm sorry, the other question, Bailey?
Yep. The second question is there a way to automatically delete the temp tables if someone had saved them?
Automatically delete a temp table, depending on what that temp table is. How a process will work within Unit 4 is it's constantly creating temporary tables. So those will automatically be deleted unless when it's ran, you click on Save the Temporary Tables. So in that sense, they will be automatically deleted. However, if somebody creates a temp table in the system, for whatever reason, can it be automatically deleted? Not that I'm aware of without a custom script.
Okay.
Okay. And sorry, we didn't talk about, so you had one more question there about why would we move up to SQL, like a newer version of SQL?
Back on the SQL question. That was, is updating the drivers a requirement? And then the second part of that was, what drives the need to upgrade the SQL environment, which I think you answered.
Yeah, to upgrade the SQL environment is just because of the end of life and extended support and whatnot.
Okay.
If you're looking for more secure connectivity using for your SQL, SQL 2022 has a lot more security features within it. However, for our purposes and basic installations and whatnot, 2019, 2017, they are working great. But the drive to that obviously is just end of mainstream support if you're looking for things there, and obviously the end of life of extended support.
Okay. All right, over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was finding the mouse. Thank you. Actually, Bailey, I wanted to say thank you for making sure we started at the correct time this morning and recording this demonstration. I had a challenge in the past. So my portion of this is more about the functionality within the application. So where Rod has been talking for the last half hour or so about the technical environment. This is going to be, what he's talked about has been related to that technical setup and maintenance of the system. My portion of it is a little more functional, meaning that we're doing things within the CentralCommand application, the Unit 4 ERP application, or in the Agresso Management Console, the AMC. So we're going to talk about, in the settings module, we have two different types of data maintenance that we can do from within the application. The settings module allows us functionality around the Unit 4 ERP environment. The performance of the database, the indexes that are created. I know a lot of people have created indexes outside of CentralCommand, outside of the Unit 4 ERP environment, and these indexes need to be periodically refreshed because indexing within your database allows the system to query that database more efficiently. And so when we're creating indexes, if your technical team is creating them outside of CentralCommand, then if we did something, a refresh on the database, if we did some type of cleanup, those indexes may not be, if they're based on the Unit 4 ERP or CentralCommand tables, they may not be carried over or forward as part of an upgrade. So we want to be sure that anything that we're doing with regards to this database, we try to do as much as we can within the application. So we're going to talk about amendment logging. We're going to talk about the performance of the database in the settings menu under data control. We're also going to look at the Unit 4 archiving routines, the transfer to historical GL, archiving to file, transfer from historical GL, and what those functionalities mean. We're also going to look at, in the application, the CentralCommand data archiving and why we should be using this to maintain the health and performance of your CentralCommand environment. And finally, what's not shown here, we're going to go into the management console and talk a little bit about the configuration of keeping report logs and things like that. So where Rod has mentioned the ability to save temporary tables so that we can go back and requery that information and look at troubleshooting those types of tables, we're going to be looking at the maintenance of the environment and how do we set up the number of, or the amount of report logs that we keep within the system. So I'm going to switch over here to the application. And so when we log into CentralCommand, the archiving routines, like I said, there are two different types of archiving routines. The first, when we go into the settings module and go into system administration, we're going to be looking at two things. We're going to be looking at this data control. We're going to be looking at the deletion and archiving routines. So underneath the data control allows us some functionality here. I'm going to first talk about amendment logging, because amendment logging can take up a lot of space in your database. So this tool allows us to be able to look at any table that's within the database and set up amendment logging so that we can determine who updated something on a table when they updated it. So I want to point out a couple of things here. You have three columns: this registration column, you have the amendment column, and you have the deletion column. Those three columns tell the system when do you want to track something that's going on. So let me give you a quick example, something that we do in CentralCommand already as part of the history of the travel transaction. We write to history anytime someone goes in to make a change to the financial parts of a CentralCommand travel transaction. There are other pieces where if someone makes a change to a hotel segment, so if you go into the transaction and you go into the itinerary setup or the itinerary segments, and you go to a hotel transaction and you change something on that hotel transaction, those changes are not necessarily documented in such a way where you can go back and research exactly what the original value was, what the historic, what it was changed to. This amendment logging allows us to be able to set up that detailed logging of when someone went into a table, made a change. It tells us what the original value was and what the changed value was. So where we look at that, if I came down to the bottom here and added a new table, TTD hotel, for example, and said, I don't want to mark it as every time a hotel is registered in the system, because we have so many travel transactions coming in. The first time the travel transaction comes in, we register that on the hotel history table. If a new interface message comes into the system and does the find and replace on that hotel segment, we register that change in the hotel history table. But if someone opens a transaction, makes a change, makes an amendment to that hotel and save it, we don't save that to the hotel history. Okay, it's only that interface history that goes into that hotel segment history table in CentralCommand. This amendment logging would allow us to log all of those other types of changes. Okay, so just be aware of this. This is something that is very helpful to be used, but it can be costly in terms of the database size and space. So be very careful when you turn this on. Think about what your need is before doing it, but just know that it is there for as a very good tool. The second thing is that performance I was talking about. When we look at the indexes, all of the indexes for Unit 4 and CentralCommand that the system has defined are set up in this table. If we create indexes outside of this table in the CentralCommand database, those have to be managed separately. If, on the other hand, those people who are creating indexes come in and manage those indexes here within, even if they create a new index on a table because they want to improve performance based on something that we're looking for. Let me give you an example here. If I come up to the table name, TTD doc. Okay, these are all the indexes today that are on that table. To be able to improve some of the search capabilities, we might change or add some additional fields to a trigger or an index or a new index. So here we got one index on the transaction date, right? So in the case of this, we might have an index if we're going to be querying on the begin date or end date of that P&R, that document. We might put in a new index based on that different begin or end date parameter in that table. If I did it in SQL, it would have to be managed separately. It would have to be refreshed separately. If I put it in central or into the Unit 4 indexes environment, I can schedule rebuilding indexes weekly, either right before or right after my backup, so that I can maintain the performance level of the database. The other thing is you can set your index rebuild based on different things within this in this table. We can do it based on a specific index name or all indexes names. If I wanted to say just re-index all of my TTD tables, it allows the system to go in and schedule those index rebuilds so that, again, it's about maintaining the performance of your environment. So these are things that we want to promote as scheduled tasks to help your system query and work more efficiently. Finally, in this settings module, I wanted to go down to here transferring to historical GL. This is when you have a lot of our customers who've been on CentralCommand and Unit 4 for years. They will tend to their systems begin to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and without archiving some of that historical data off, every time we query something within the Unit 4 environment, it has to query that whole large table, whether it's a travel table or a financial table. It's querying the table, even on a browser, when you're looking at adding your search parameters, it's querying the whole table to find the data that meets your search parameter query. If we archive older data off to historical tables, what that allows us to do is make our live table queries faster. It also allows us to move that data off to the historical table, but also we can retrieve it from that table. So let's say you do have a customer who we've archived historical data off to the historical tables, older data from 2014 and before. But the customer comes to you and says, hey, I need a query that goes back as long as we've been with your agency. This retrieval, transfer from historical data, allows us to bring that data back into the live environment to be able to query it using our browser queries, using our reports that we've set up. So it's important to know when we're archiving data off to historical tables, and in what situations do we want to allow someone to bring historical data back for querying purposes. In CentralCommand, we have that same type of functionality specifically for the travel data. When we're looking at archiving travel data, we have some parameters in this feature that allows us to say months to keep data. What that means is if I want to keep a rolling 36 months of data in our live table, I can schedule this to run at the beginning of every month, and it will take the 37th month of data in my query and archive it off to history, keeping all of my 36 months of active data in place. The other thing is, if I'm doing my first update, this is where we can say from date to date. It allows us, let's say that you wanted to be able to, at the end of the month, or I'm sorry, at the end of the year, if you want to only archive data off 1 year at a time. So as we hit 2025, if you had not archived off your data for 2018, we can set this schedule up so that it looks at the date from to date to parameters, and that way it allows us to keep a specific date range of information. So in this case, if I'm archiving the data off a year at a time, if I hit 2025 and want to archive my data for 2018 only, I could put in here from January 1st, 2018 to January 31st of 2018. This allows us to be able to manage the expectations of how often are we putting that data into the historical tables. The other thing is, and when you look at the retrieval of data from that travel, in here, you can see that we can retrieve data based on certain parameters within that historical data. So this is where I said if you had a customer who wanted you to report on data as far back as you had been their agency, you can put in that specific customer ID, only bringing that historical data back into the live tables for your reporting periods. The other thing I do want to point out here is, let's say that you brought this customer's historical data back on the 15th of February. And if we looked at the data archiving routine, we said we're going to keep the last 24 months of data, okay? These two things are going to work together, meaning that if I brought that historical data back on the 15th of February, and I have a monthly archiving process that runs and keeping only the last 24 months of data in this example, then all of that historical data that I brought forward or back into the live system on the 15th of February, on the 1st of March, would automatically be moved back to the historical tables. So by doing this, by setting it up for automatic archiving with a rolling 36 or 48 months of data that you keep, anything that you brought back into the system for management of a customer or a branch or a vendor would automatically be rolled back to history at the end of the month the next time the archiving ran. So it helps you maintain that live reporting environment, but still providing you with the access to be able to get to that information. The last thing I do want to point out is we do have a data deletion routine as well. We can delete it off. It depends on your backups. It depends on what you're doing with that. So just be aware of that process and how long you want to keep the data in your system to be able to go back and retrieve it. Finally, my last piece that I wanted to touch on is in the management console. So again, this is the functional side of maintenance of your environment. One of the things when we look at your data source and we go under the features, you have two different business servers. You've got your 64-bit business server, you got your 32-bit business server. We have different things that run in these different servers, okay? You're all familiar with like our timed processes. Our timed processes, if you have any Intel agents set up, if you have any data warehousing set up, or our TPS that loads that data into the financial tables, all of these timed processes, when they run, they create logs, okay? If we go into our reports, and we go into our report queues, anytime we have a server process in CentralCommand, data load, or what you're looking at here is I've got my data load, I've got my XB50 financial processing, I've got my X2007 service fee queue. Anytime those server processes run, they create a log and put it into the system. If we go under configuration and we go into cleanup routines, this cleanup routine allows us to tell the system either how long do we want to keep that report that we've run. So in this situation, we're enabling the system to clean up the older reports, the report logs that have been run. We can either do it by number of report orders. So let's say data load is running every 15 minutes or every 5 minutes. If I say keep based on the number of report orders, if I only keep the last 15 reports, it's only going to keep the last 15 every 5-minute reports that I see there. I can also put in that I can say, keep it for a number of days. So data load, if it's running every 5 minutes throughout the day, I may not want to only keep the last 15 data loads, right? To be able to go in and look at that history of the reports. I may want to keep it for 5 days. Okay, so this is where, and again, it's not a specific, it's not specific to the type of report that we're running, but it is specific to the business server that it's being run on. So if you have your financial processing, your data load, or anything where you have a lot of scheduled reports that are running on a timed schedule, they're running in the 64-bit queue, I might want to keep them for 5 days. If I'm looking at something else, if I'm looking at, think about your invoicing queue, right? Keeping invoices for the last 15 order reports may not be enough. So think about that, and separating that type of work into the different business servers that you have. The other is, if I'm looking at a report that gets run occasionally or once a week, if I keep that report in that cleanup, if I keep 15 of those report logs, then I'm going to have the last 15 weeks of report logs if that report is only run once a week. Okay, so that's what this is going to do for us. It's going to say, what are we doing with that information? We're going to keep it, and then older than, so we're going to purge it older than 15 report orders, and then we're also going to delete the report output files from the disk. What that means is if it, so the first two parameters here, number of orders, number of 15, is going to be what are we displaying in the system? Okay, when we go over to the report order screen, what are we displaying there? This parameter, delete files, goes into the report results, where we're putting the report results for that report, and deletes the files from there. Remember, Rod had talked about earlier managing how much space you're keeping on your application server, where those interface files are going, where our report log files are going. So being able to say, yeah, once we clean up the report orders, do we want to delete those files or not is important. The last piece down here, this process and event history purging, we're going to keep it for how many hours? 24 hours. What that means is if I go down to my activity monitoring, the activity monitoring will show me what's being run right now. So right now I'm looking at pending and running processes. If I click on TPS here and I say run it, it'll show me that it's going to run, and then it's going to say what the next time it's going to run is. If I pull this drop down and I go to history, because I set that parameter to say only display the last 24 hours of things that are being run, that's what I'm seeing here. So if I look at my scheduled start date, you can see that here is, let me get this back up to the top real quick. Okay, so this is the report yesterday, 24 hours ago, that I ran. The newest one is on the 20th at 11:22. So by setting this cleanup routine to keep process information for 24 hours, what that means is I can go back into my activity monitoring within the management console, and I can look at that process data for the last 24 hours. I can also set that up if I wanted to say 48 hours, right? So I can keep it for 2 days instead. So just be aware of this cleanup routine for the processes that the management console is running in the background. Okay?
Okay.
With that, we're going to switch it back over to questions, and Bailey, you can take back the screen.
Sounds
And
good.
do we have any additional questions that we'd like to talk about?
We do have a question about why, oh, I'm having a little cover up. Why is full recovery better than simple?
Right, and I just replied back to that one on screen. However, thanks, Andy. That's a great question. So full recovery mode is recommended by the technical guidelines. However, full recovery, it allows you to restore your database at a specific time and date, providing you've been backing up your log files. So with full recovery, transactions are continuously logged and keeps them until you actually back them up. And as an added benefit, and I don't know if many people are doing this or any, it could be used for an additional type of disaster recovery where it's key in the use of like high availability, or if you're using log shipping or something like that, meaning that as transactions happen within your current server, it can kind of log ship over to another server as a form of disaster recovery, or if you're using it for reporting or something like that. Simple recovery works well as too, but it's normally reserved for test or development where you don't need to back up your log files. And if some potential data loss is there, so for example, because you're not using log files, you're just relying on the data itself. If you do a backup and 2 days later you made some changes, and then you're going to do another backup, but something happened, you may potentially lose a couple of days worth of data for simple mode. Whereas if you're using full mode, you could refer back to your log files at a certain date and time, and you could go from that point. So at a high level, full recovery is great for production and crucial data, and simple recovery is more for testing and development.
Awesome. Another question from earlier was from Michael. So I guess this question is going back to you, Rod. Do you recommend a backup schedule, and how often should customers be backing up their environment?
Yeah, of course, a backup schedule is key to your disaster recovery. I like to recommend that it's backed up on a nightly basis, depending on obviously the size of your database. I know some clients, their database is getting quite large and they back up chunks of it, like they'll do a certain piece and then back up another piece. But if we can back up on a nightly basis, I think that's fantastic. Some people prefer, or some areas prefer, to back up on a weekly basis and then do incremental or differential backups throughout the week, which works as well. So differential just backs up the items that happened for that day, not the entire database. So you have your week's backup, let's say a Sunday night, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're doing differential backups. And if something happens on a Thursday, then you can just restore back from that Thursday. So I do recommend doing something on a nightly basis for sure. And
Awesome.
Yes, the schedule basis would be perfect, obviously.
I think that's all the questions that we have currently. And with 2 minutes left, I'll just leave this reminder here that, again, we'll be meeting again for our next webinar next month on March 20th. So if you've registered for this one, you should also have the link to be able to register for the next one, and we'll work on getting those spring webinars out. But if there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and say thank you on behalf of Rod and Michael for coming to this month's webinar. We hope that it was useful to you. Be on the lookout for the recording if there's someone in your organization that you need to make sure gets the information. We're happy to make sure that they're able to play that back and watch it for themselves. And like I said, we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.